Hi, I'm Holly Scott here at 160 Studios with my partners, Ajay Nair and Tom Farr. So glad to have you all close instead of the miles and miles away that you typically are.
Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, it's great to be here today. We're going to comment a bit on the state of medtech funding. There's been a lot of discussion around where we were and what happened in 2023 and where we're going 2024. And we're fortunate to be in a very unique vantage point based on our focus in global search and building organizations. Ajay leads our APAC effort as well as the Middle East, and Tom Farr leads the UK and European effort. So glad to have you both with us. Let's jump right in. What have we seen and what will we expect? Ajay, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Holly. So interestingly, I think 2022 saw sort of a decrease in the overall amount of deals in general, especially in medtech. You know, in Asia and Middle East, for example, and definitely in Asia, it's a conglomerate of med device, digital health is a big deal there. And then obviously the pharma, diagnostics, life sciences sector is huge. In 2022, we definitely had a downtrend of number of deals, but the check sizes, the actual deal volumes were almost the same. So what they saw in terms of a decline in number of deals made up for the size of transaction. 2023, I think we saw the same. However, there were some sizable PE deals done. I mean, one in particular that I thought was very interesting was Astra Medical sold 65% of their healthcare business in the Middle East. That was a very, very big transaction for about $1 billion. So yeah, I think 2022 and 2023 saw that same trend. However, I think 2024 will be a real pickup in the number of deals.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. And on the U.S. front, we saw the 2022-2023 transition be a little bit later. So we saw the 2021 highs and the 2022 continue high, and then in the 2023 era, it really started, deflating in terms of capital investment. And of course, most of our deals are from the private sector, so it's been pretty interesting. How about you, Tom? What did you see?
Yeah, UK, Europe, 2022, 2023 generally is always a little bit more conservative anyway in those regions. We did see a massive decrease of deals happening, as Ajay mentioned, similar to APAC. We did still see some significant deals happening, in particular 2023 with CMR Surgical, so close to pretty large financing round as well to get them to where they are right now in 2024 as well. So we've still seen a few things happening, but generally slowed right down with less kind of investment being put into those startups, and even the mid caps kind of slowing down as well.
No, it's been an interesting transition. Although I feel that the gates have opened up in a bullish way for our new year. The trend in the U.S. market has been good. There's been big deals with the Boston Scientific and the Axonics deal, and some real banner scenarios that have come out right out of the gate, and we're only still January. So it's a good trend to see. We're seeing a lot of PE firms come in earlier as well in the financial world, especially with where VCs have gotten stagnant and have to refund their own companies and reinvest and take care of their portfolio. It's created an awesome opportunity for other creative financiers to come in and assess and get pretty interesting opportunities where they may not have played before. So we expect that trend to continue.
Yeah, I'm seeing something along the same lines. I think it's interesting to point out that there are a lot of American startups that are actually starting to look for money outside the U.S. So there are a number of C-level or executive, suite members who are obviously trying the traditional channels in the U.S. But there's a big move, and because we're plugged in with LSI and MedTech Innovator, for example, the same people we're seeing at LSI US, we're starting to see them at LSI Europe, APAC Med, which is where TMG was at last year. So yeah, I think it's an interesting trend to see a lot of these American companies looking for OUS money. And like you mentioned, Holly, one thing that I've noticed is that the PE community are definitely going earlier. Now, just to point out, in the Middle East, there really is a lot more maturity in private equity. Just nature of the market there. Fintech has been around and mature for a long time. Banking, all of those industries are very, very mature. So private equity is a no-brainer. They've been there for ages. But generally, they haven't been comfortable investing in early stage. And now I think with real growth in the Saudi market, United Arab Emirates, there are a lot of, and especially government-backed funds are starting to move earlier in the stream.
That's interesting. What do you think that will do for the innovative community? Do you see that as opportunistic?
Yeah, look, I think it's an absolutely great thing. I think, again, from the Asia Pacific and Middle East vantage, it's really interesting to watch. Two of my favorite markets to watch are Israel and Singapore, because I think they have the most number of innovative companies coming out per capita. But I think that's also a real representation of their government-backed ecosystem, right? You've got phenomenal government-backed incubators, innovators, accelerators, VCs, PEs, all plugged in. And then, with great exits as well, it sort of matures that whole market. So Israel, I think, if you just look at their ecosystem in terms of companies, almost 36% are medical device. If you add digital health, you're looking at almost 66%. Singapore leads the way with pharma and life science. But because of that ecosystem perfectly suited to the innovative community, I think if more countries could replicate that, it would be just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's funny, we saw, of course, in the US, a huge trend, as you comment on, where we are now looking at other funding vehicles, other funding locations and geographies, a lot more income and investment from the APAC region than ever before. And frankly, for many years, I worked in a world that spooked a lot of people. The lack of control, the lack of regional governance. What is this going to mean, especially with Chinese money? And you know what? If you think about it in a more holistic way, the more opportunities we have, create this healthy economy and this healthy diversity that we could all benefit from. And there's tons more cross-disciplinary work going on from different geographies and cross-pollination from ideas, just like you're saying with the LSI representation. And Tom, I think UK leads in terms of Europe of startups and innovation, and so much of that's coming to the States, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and to jump on the back of Ajay's point as well on the accelerators and governmental funds as well, we're seeing a big push with the EIC in Europe as well. They're putting a lot of funding into early stage innovation companies, accelerating companies from kind of 100K right the way through to around about 50 million. So significant deals are still happening with the EIC. They're doing a lot of work in robotics. They're doing a lot of work in the digital health space as well in Europe and stepping back into the UK as well. But UK's really, we've seen a real build for that technology side of things. Digital health, telehealth, telemedicine has always been and starting to continue being big in the UK market, going into the US. But we're seeing a big push on the strategic alliances with companies that have already developed into a US market on the digital health play, clinical workflow programs, and then partnering with a surgical robotics organization in orthopedics, for argument's sake. So we're seeing a greater increase of those strategic alliances to get companies from the UK into the US market or into the wider global market as well.
That's an excellent point. I think 2024 is the year of partnerships when I think about what I'm most excited about, because in 2023, we were realizing how hard some of these technologies are to bring to market alone. Think about surgical robotics, think about navigation, imaging, a lot of the digital back-end organizations they really don't either have the commercial infrastructure to support it, or they don't have the understanding of the workflow. But when they start thinking about the partnerships with the strategics or get involved in a harmonistic way early, it can really create opportunities for both sides. So we're seeing that in the US certainly as more frequently and earlier than before. And I think that's going to do a lot for organizations. And not just device companies too, we're seeing pharma and device companies partner earlier.
I think the interesting thing to note is, companies that we heard from at LSI Barcelona last year, APAC Med was another example, companies like Alio, which are I think Alio's in a Series E stage. They originally may have had a build to buy or build to exit strategy, but they then pivoted and then moved towards more in revenue, commercialization, expansion, and really looked at opening up markets. So, Alio's had a big play and big success in the Middle East as of recent. Gauze was another example that was shared at APAC Med. It was a Stryker acquisition, and the former founder of Gauze came and did a speech on sort of his original strategy and then how he had to pivot to basically grow the company. The reason I'm mentioning these things is regardless of market conditions and fundraising status, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to actually grow in markets, expand revenue, which is something investors absolutely love. And I think that, accretively helps career development and hiring across the globe as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And a point you were sharing with me yesterday that I thought was quite interesting is that you're seeing historically most of the funding has been government backed throughout the region, right? And that there is more private money opening up. Is that indeed the case?
Yeah, it's an interesting, Asia's an interesting landscape. And if you maybe look at three, I'd say perhaps four unique markets. You've got China, which has a lot of private equity, VC money. A lot of it comes from government backing. They're very much into tech development, so they invest quite a bit in healthcare, med tech, pharma, multiple sectors, but highly dependent on the economy, right? Mm-hmm. And like in other countries as well, the economy, because of the government backing, they have to sort of focus around where the economy's at. Singapore is a great example because you basically got sovereign funds. You've got what's called Singapore reserves that are managed by companies almost like fund management, wealth management. So notably, there's a GIC, there's Temasek Holdings. These are the ones that are actually managing Singaporean money, government money, but they're actually putting it into investments, whether it's short-term, long-term. So again, government-backed. I think India is seeing a lot more private as opposed to Singapore and China. You're seeing a lot more VCs, private equity. You're seeing a lot of PE VC firms from the US actually open up Indian chapters, like Sequoia is a great example. And then Australia is a vastly different example where young startups can actually list on the Australian Stock Exchange as a funding mechanism. So it's really shareholder money that's actually driving growth. Fascinating.
And it again comes back to the innovators and the young organizations and even the more mature companies. They have more diverse options. And the U.S. is still, of course, an important market for most. And the general feel is impatience with the investment community, where in some of the other entities, some of the other regions, you have more of a hold cash cow mentality. They want to bring on these organizations and fuel them and continue to allow them to flourish without really making the moves that maybe you may expect coming to the U.S. investors. So it's opportunity. It's opportunity. Yes, it's different. Yes, it's more globalization, but that can create a lot of open doors and openness overall in the marketplace. So what do you think this means for the organizations that are building companies and especially those that are, let's start with the market, those outside the U.S. coming to the U.S.? Tom, are you seeing this and have any thoughts on those trends?
Yeah, so we are seeing a number swinging into the US as well. So I guess from a build perspective, we're seeing a lot of companies, and this comes back to the hiring side of things as well. We are seeing a lot of companies maybe not getting boots on the ground immediately from a permanent individual. We're seeing a bit of fractional recruiting happening as well, bringing in fractional RAQA, real specialists who are helping companies transition across the pond and anchoring across into the US market as well. That's where we're really seeing a lot of development happening. US, UK, European-based companies, again, it's fully focused on commercialization. So clin, reg, qual, and sales is what we're really seeing from that globalization and build and hiring side of things as these companies get into those markets.
Ajay, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, look, selfishly, I'm going to put it from a Mullings Group lens, right? I think the Mullings Group is really, the Mullings Group are quite well placed because there's a couple of things happening. I think US companies at a certain stage absolutely have to go outside the US. Now, they can define what they want their US success footprint to be, but there comes a point where they absolutely have to go outside the US. And that's where I think real regional expertise comes in hand. And that's where I think they really start recruiting for talent. Mm-hmm. And they look for regional expertise, credentials, commercial expertise, or other functions, right? So yes, US companies are looking to go abroad. And I think having the Mullings Group having footprint outside the US is tremendously helpful. But equally from the other end, if you look at all of the innovators coming from Asia, Middle East, Australia, the holy grail market, like it or not, is the US. So the FTA is the biggest stamp you're going to get in terms of a regulatory approval. Population-wise, reimbursement-wise, the US is that market that everybody goes to. So the fact that Mullings Group has such a long history, 10-year presence in the US allows us to be equally placed. So what I'm seeing is lots and lots of interest in terms of placement, search. I think really it's a matter of when they're actually looking to place people, but we are uniquely positioned from either an advisory, awareness creation, that's our media engine, or when they're actually ready for fractional or permanent recruiting, we hit all those slots.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, the US is the huge market, but of course, let's remind the audience that by 2030, we do expect the APAC region to take that lead. The interesting point that you make, Ajay, is as you and I were chatting over coffee earlier today, our number one call from young companies and CEOs is, how do we do this? You know, what do we need to do to get into the US market? Or what do we need to do to extend our presence into the APAC region or into the UK? Or where do we start? And it doesn't necessarily start with a hire. It starts with a conversation. Yep. So let's talk about what those goals are. Let's talk about what that looks like. And then we can help you reverse engineer what that means. And that could be a fractional hire for market intel or for developing the key opinion leaders or developing some sense of what's going to need to be necessary for adoption before you really budget and go hire and make those hires. It really is a well thought out plan, and we take that very seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. The build is hand in hand with the growth and the plans, and that's something that we are fortunate as an organization that's been based here in the States for 2 decades to now have experts across the globe to help us on these partnerships. In terms of career development, much of the individuals listening to our chat today are thinking about what this could mean to them career-wise. And now that we do see various funding strategies, now that we do see more of a global approach to going to market, and we see less rigid plans on exit. What do you see this meaning, Tom? What do you think this means for the young engineer who's sitting in a large strategic, maybe as well as in a startup, maybe the young founder? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it gives them a greater, it can give them a greater awareness of what else is happening out there, different ways of functioning in businesses. And this is going back from a selfish perspective for me. I'm sat in an office in the UK, but get to work with so many global individuals. Ajay out in Australia, yourself in the US. We work with Europeans, pretty much everywhere we're working with. So I think that globalization of the business and of the medtech world will allow people to just get a broader mindset across how business is done from West Coast right the way across to APAC as well. Different engineering teams, different ways of building companies. I think that's what will be really important over the next few years on the globalization of the market.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a one-size-fits-all. What's going to work in the US is certainly not going to be the same footprint for China or Israel or the UK. What are your thoughts, Ajay, especially since so many of the individuals that you're working with are in mid-cap or larger strategics and considering moves and considering things? I'm curious about your perspective.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go back to what you said about, conversation and keyword being partnership or partnering. One of the things that I absolutely love, even when I was at corporate roles, I wish I had more opportunity to speak to people about how they could develop their career, especially laterally rather than vertically, right? Because oftentimes it's the lateral development that leads to diversity and experience. And there were times at corporate where I just felt limited by my region or my function. But I think being part of the Mullings Group now, based on what we write, what we post, what we do in terms of interviews, podcasts, we get a lot of individuals, either they're hiring managers or founders or individuals looking to change career. We get to speak to them. And that partnership conversation is one of my favorite things. And second to that, we obviously speak to a lot of founders about how do they do what they want to do, which is, let's say they want to enter the US market in terms of clinical. How do we actually do this? What sites or which part of the country is maybe more relevant for what they're doing versus others? So again, partnership, right? Mm-hmm. And lastly, I think our vantage point puts us in a very unique place to see the world in terms of the various clients we're working with. I think the other beauty of our partnership within the Mullings Group is we don't have a siloed approach. We constantly talk to each other about, hey, who's doing what in this region, what's happening. So that allows us to be more fluid when we speak to whether it's a hiring manager or an individual looking for a position.
Yeah, and you're building your company with a team. We really can tap into each other's assets and skill sets and resources for the individual. I know we both have several partnerships with clients where we're all mixing and mingling and then involving Rick, Joe, other assets in our organization because they have unique experiences that can add value, especially to these first-time founders, which you know I have a soft spot for.
Yes.
So the first-time founders and building out those organizations from these brilliant ideas, how can we really get this to our first milestone, our second milestone? That is not a, hey, I need to hire. That is a conversation that happens over time, and we really think through where they're at and what their goals are, and then back into what does that talent look like that's going to help us get there. Well, I'm thrilled to have you both here today and all week, and love when you're in town and not on Zoom, so it's great to have you. And to our audience, thank you for joining us in 160 Studios.